The hydraulic lift groaned under the weight of the Porsche as Maya Chun positioned herself beneath the oil pan, her weathered coveralls already stained from the morning's work. The chrome wrench in her calloused hands moved with surgical precision, each turn calculated to the exact torque specification. Around her, the cacophony of Riverside Auto filled the cavernous garage, but she worked in her own pocket of silence, methodical and invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hey, Grease Monkey! Derek's voice cut through the mechanical symphony like a rusty blade. The shop foreman stood with his arms crossed, his pristine polo shirt and khakis a stark contrast to the oil-stained concrete beneath his polished loafers. Customers asking about his transmission flush. You done playing around under there? Maya didn't look up. She continued her work, the wrench moving in perfect rhythm, her breathing steady and controlled. The oil drained into the catch pan with a steady stream, and she watched it with the focus of someone who understood that every detail mattered. I said, "Are you listening?" Derek stepped closer, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from the other mechanics scattered throughout the bay. Mrs. Patterson's been waiting an hour for that Honda. Some of us have productivity standards to meet. The other mechanics paused in their work, sensing the familiar tension that seemed to follow Maya wherever she went. Tommy Rodriguez wiped his hands on a shop rag and shook his head with a knowing smirk. She's probably trying to figure out which end of the wrench to hold, he muttered to Jake Sullivan, who was bent over the engine bay of a Ford pickup. Jake straightened up and grinned. Give her a break, Tommy. She's only been here 6 months. Maybe by Christmas she'll know the difference between a socket and a ratchet. The laughter that followed was good-natured enough on the surface, but it carried an edge that Maya had grown accustomed to. She was the outsider here, the quiet woman who had appeared one day with minimal credentials and even less to say about her background. In a world where mechanical expertise was worn like a badge of honor and shop stories were currency, her silence made her suspect. Maya finished securing the drain plug and lowered the car with mechanical precision. She moved to the next bay, where Mrs. Patterson's Honda Accord waited, its hood already propped open like a patient mouth ready for surgery. The transmission fluid was indeed due for service, but as Maya ran her fingers along the transmission lines, she noticed something that made her pause. The fluid wasn't just old. It was contaminated with metal shavings that glinted like tiny diamonds in the fluorescent light. The transmission cooler lines showed signs of internal pressure damage, and the shift solenoid housing bore the telltale residue of a system that had been pushed far beyond its design limits. This wasn't routine maintenance. This was a transmission on the verge of catastrophic failure. She walked to the service counter where Derek stood reviewing work orders with Linda, the shop's administrative assistant. Mrs. Patterson sat in the waiting area, flipping through a magazine while her granddaughter played quietly with a tablet beside her. The transmission needs more than a flush, Maya said quietly. The torque converter is failing, and there's metal contamination throughout the system. She's looking at a complete rebuild or replacement. Derek looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed irritation. It's scheduled for a flush, not a diagnostic novel. Just do the work and move on. The flush won't fix the problem. It might make it worse by stirring up the debris. She needs to know what she's facing. Look, Maya. Derek's voice took on the patronizing tone he reserved for what he considered teaching moments. I know you mean well, but Mrs. Patterson is a longtime customer. She knows her car, and she asked for a specific service. We're not here to create problems where none exist. Tommy had drifted over from his bay, drawn by the conversation like a moth to flame. Maya's probably seeing things again, he said with a theatrical whisper that was meant to be overheard. Remember last week when she insisted that Camaro had a cracked block? Turned out to be a loose radiator hose. That's different, Maya said, her voice remaining level despite the heat rising in her cheeks. This transmission is going to fail. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but soon. And when it does, she'd be stranded somewhere with her granddaughter. Jake joined the growing audience, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Maya, you've got to learn to trust the customer. If Mrs. Patterson wanted a full diagnostic, she would have asked for one. We're mechanics, not fortune tellers. Derek nodded approvingly. Exactly. Now, can you handle a simple transmission flush, or do I need to assign it to someone with more experience? The question hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Maya looked at the faces around her, reading the mixture of skepticism and condescension that had become as familiar as the smell of motor oil. She could push harder, insist on her assessment, maybe even refuse to do the work. But she had learned over the past 6 months that choosing her battles carefully was part of surviving in this environment. I'll do the flush, she said finally. Derek smiled with satisfaction. Good, and Maya? Try to keep the conspiracy theories to a minimum. We run a professional shop here. As the group dispersed, Maya returned to the Honda with a heavy feeling in her chest. She had been in situations before where speaking up was the difference between safety and disaster, where her voice carried the weight of life and death decisions. But this wasn't that world anymore. This was Riverside Auto, where customer satisfaction trumped mechanical reality, and where her instincts were treated as the overactive imagination of someone trying too hard to prove herself. She connected the transmission flush machine to the cooler lines and began the process, watching the old fluid cycle out and the new fluid cycle in. The metal shavings disappeared into the disposal system, hidden now but not eliminated. The contamination would continue its work, grinding away at the internal components until the inevitable failure occurred. As she worked, Maya's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with her apartment complex manager that morning. The rent was going up again, and her salary at Riverside Auto barely covered her current expenses. She needed this job, needed the steady paycheck and the health insurance that came with it. She couldn't afford to be the squeaky wheel, the troublemaker who questioned every decision and made waves where calm waters were preferred. The Honda's owner watched through the service bay window as Maya completed the flush. Mrs. Patterson was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. Her granddaughter couldn't have been more than 8, all bright eyes and boundless energy contained only by the confines of the waiting area chairs. Maya finished the service and printed out the work order. As she walked to the counter to process the payment, she caught Mrs. Patterson's eye and smiled. The older woman smiled back, the kind of warm, genuine expression that reminded Maya why she had chosen to work with her hands in the first place. "How's she running?" Mrs. Patterson asked as Linda processed her credit card. "The flush is complete," Maya said carefully. "Your fluid levels are good, and everything should shift smoothly for a while." "For a while?" Mrs. Patterson picked up on the qualification immediately. Maya glanced toward Derek's office, where she could see him on the phone with what appeared to be an important call. "Just keep an eye on how it shifts. If you notice any hesitation or slipping, especially when it's cold, bring it back in right away." Mrs. Patterson nodded, though Maya could see the confusion in her eyes. "Is there something I should be worried about?" The question hung between them like a bridge Maya wasn't sure she should cross. She looked at the granddaughter who had put down her tablet and was watching the adults with the keen interest children reserve for conversations they sensed were important. "Just normal wear and tear," Maya said finally. "Regular maintenance should keep you running fine." As Mrs. Patterson and her granddaughter left, Maya felt the familiar weight of compromise settling over her shoulders. She had done the job she was asked to do, followed the protocol she was expected to follow, and kept the peace that everyone seemed so invested in maintaining. But as she watched the Honda pull out of the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed in some fundamental way. The afternoon wore on with its usual rhythm of repairs and customer interactions. Maya worked through a brake job on a Chevy Silverado, replaced the water pump on a Nissan Sentra, and diagnosed a mysterious electrical issue in a Jeep Wrangler that had 3 other mechanics stumped. Each job she approached with the same methodical precision, the same attention to detail that had become her signature. But it was the attention to detail that seemed to set her apart in ways that made her colleagues uncomfortable. When she replaced brake pads, she didn't just swap out the worn components. She measured the rotors for thickness and runout, checked the brake fluid for contamination, and inspected the calipers for signs of premature wear. When she changed oil, she examined the filter element for metal particles and noted any unusual wear patterns in the drain plug threads. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya's at it again, she heard Jake say to Tommy as she worked beneath the Jeep, tracing an electrical short through the vehicle's wiring harness with a multimeter. $20 says she finds some catastrophic problem that nobody else noticed. You're on, Tommy replied. My money says it's a simple loose connection, and she's just trying to impress Derek with her detective work. Maya ignored the conversation and continued her methodical inspection. The short wasn't in the obvious places where most mechanics would look first. It wasn't in the battery connections or the alternator wiring. Instead, she followed the circuit through the vehicle's computerized systems, checking voltage drops and resistance values with the patience of someone who understood that electricity always told a story if you knew how to listen. The problem revealed itself after an hour of careful investigation. A wire harness had been damaged during a previous repair, probably when someone had replaced the starter motor without properly securing the electrical connections afterward. The damaged insulation had allowed the wire to ground intermittently against the engine block, creating a short that would only manifest under specific conditions. It was the kind of problem that could cause a vehicle to stall without warning, potentially in traffic or in a dangerous location. Maya documented her findings and wrote up a detailed repair estimate, including the cost of the new wiring harness and the labor time required to properly route it through the engine compartment. Derek reviewed her estimate with the kind of expression usually reserved for unexpectedly large bills. A wire harness? For an electrical problem? Are you sure it's not just a loose battery terminal? The battery terminals are fine, Maya replied. The short is in the engine management harness, probably caused during the starter replacement. You can see the damage here. She showed him the digital photos she had taken with her phone, clearly highlighting the abraded insulation and the scorch marks where the wire had been grounding. This seems excessive, Derek said, showing the estimate to Jake, who had wandered over to see what the commotion was about. Jake, take a look at this Jeep. Maybe you can find a simpler solution. Jake spent 15 minutes under the hood, checking the obvious culprits and running through the standard electrical diagnostic routine. He emerged with dirty hands and a puzzled expression. I don't see anything obvious, he admitted. Maybe it's intermittent. Intermittent problems are usually the hardest to find, Derek said, with the tone of someone dispensing wisdom. Maya, are you sure you didn't miss something simple? Sometimes the most obvious answer is the right one. Maya bit back her first response and instead pulled out her multimeter. Would you like me to show you the voltage readings? The short is consistent and measurable. It's not intermittent, and it's not obvious unless you know where to look. I don't need a science lecture, Derek said. Just fix it the simplest way possible. These people don't need to spend a fortune on theoretical problems. The dismissal stung more than Maya cared to admit, but she nodded and returned to the Jeep. She could do a temporary repair, splice in a new section of wire, and secure it away from the grounding point. It would solve the immediate problem and cost the customer significantly less money. It wouldn't address the underlying issue with the damaged harness, but it would get the vehicle running reliably again. As she worked, Maya found herself thinking about the standards she had once lived by, the expectations that had governed every decision and every action in a world where failure wasn't just disappointing, but potentially deadly. In that world, temporary fixes were unacceptable, and thoroughness wasn't optional. Every system had to work perfectly because lives depended on that perfection. But this wasn't that world. This was a place where customer satisfaction meant keeping costs low and turnaround times fast. Thoroughness was seen as overthinking, and attention to detail was viewed with suspicion. Maya completed the splice repair and tested the electrical system, confirming that the short had been eliminated and the vehicle would run reliably. The Jeep's owner was thrilled with the relatively modest repair bill and praised Derek for running such an honest shop. Maya watched from across the bay as the customer shook Derek's hand and promised to recommend Riverside Auto to his friends. It was a good outcome by any reasonable measure, and yet Maya felt the familiar hollow sensation that came with knowing she could have done better. The day's last customer was a young mother whose minivan had been making strange noises during acceleration. Maya listened to the description and recognized the symptoms immediately. The CV joints were failing, probably both sides based on the pattern of noise the woman described. It was a common problem on vehicles with high mileage, and one that could be dangerous if left unaddressed. Maya performed the inspection with her usual thoroughness, checking not just the CV joints, but the entire drivetrain system. What she found was worse than she had expected. Both outer CV joints were indeed failing, but the inner joints showed signs of wear as well. More concerning was the condition of the differential, which showed evidence of contamination and inadequate lubrication. The minivan was a critical transportation link for a family that clearly couldn't afford unexpected breakdowns. Maya could see the car seats in the back, the scatter of toys and snacks that spoke of a vehicle used for the daily logistics of raising children. This wasn't a luxury item or a weekend toy. It was lifeline transportation that needed to be absolutely reliable. She prepared a comprehensive estimate that included both CV joints, a differential service, and replacement of the worn suspension, components that were contributing to the premature joint failure. It was expensive, but it was also the kind of thorough repair that would keep the minivan running safely for years to come. Derek reviewed the estimate with barely concealed exasperation. Maya, this is a 10-year-old minivan, not a NASA spacecraft. Just fix the CV joints and let her drive. The differential contamination is going to cause the new joints to fail prematurely, Maya explained. And the worn suspension components are what caused the problem in the first place. If we don't address the root causes, she'll be back here in 6 months with the same problems. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Tommy said with a grin. Job security, right? The comment was meant as a joke, but it hit Maya like a physical blow. She stared at Tommy for a moment, seeing in his casual dismissal of the customer's welfare everything that was wrong with the approach she was expected to adopt. These weren't just vehicles to be repaired. They were the means by which people lived their lives, got to work, took their children to school, responded to emergencies. She's a single mother, Maya said quietly. If this van breaks down on the freeway with her kids in it, job security isn't going to matter. The shop fell silent. Derek's expression hardened, and Maya realized she had crossed a line she hadn't meant to approach. In the charged atmosphere that followed, she could feel the weight of judgment settling over her like a heavy blanket. Maya, Derek said with forced calm, I think you need to remember that we're running a business here, not a charity. Our job is to provide the service the customer requests, not to solve every problem we can imagine. Just do the CV joints. Maya looked around the shop at the faces of her colleagues, reading the mixture of discomfort and disapproval in their expressions. She had violated an unspoken rule, challenged not just Derek's authority, but the entire philosophy that governed how they approached their work. In doing so, she had revealed something about herself that didn't fit with the image of the quiet, competent mechanic they had grown accustomed to. She nodded without speaking and returned to the minivan. As she began the process of removing the old CV joints, Maya found herself thinking about the distance between the person she had been and the person she was trying to become. The transition wasn't as clean as she had hoped, and the skills she had once relied upon seemed to create as many problems as they solved in this new environment. The CV joint replacement proceeded smoothly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the familiar process of disassembly and reassembly. But as she worked, Maya couldn't shake the image of the young mother's face when she had described the strange noises, the worry and vulnerability that came with depending on a vehicle you couldn't afford to see fail. When the repair was complete, Maya delivered the minivan to its owner with mixed feelings. The immediate problem had been solved, and the vehicle would run quietly for the foreseeable future. But the underlying issues remained, waiting to manifest themselves at some inconvenient and potentially dangerous moment. As the day wound down and the other mechanics began cleaning their work areas, Maya found herself alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The standard she had internalized, the attention to detail that had once been her greatest strength, seemed to mark her as a troublemaker in an environment that valued efficiency over excellence. She finished organizing her tools with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Each implement returned to its designated place in the toolbox she had assembled over years of careful selection. The tools themselves told a story of someone who took their craft seriously, who understood that the right equipment used properly was the foundation of all good work. But as Maya locked her toolbox and prepared to leave Riverside Auto for another day, she wondered if taking her craft seriously was compatible with keeping her job. The tension between doing work she could be proud of and doing work that satisfied her employers seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could maintain the balance. The emergency came on a Tuesday morning when Maya arrived at Riverside Auto to find chaos replacing the usual organized bustle of the shop. Derek stood near the service counter with his phone pressed to his ear, his face flushed with the kind of stress that came from problems beyond his control. Linda frantically shuffled through paperwork while 3 customers waited with varying degrees of patience for answers that clearly weren't coming easily. Maya changed into her coveralls and approached Tommy, who was leaning against his workbench with the expression of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. "What's happening?" she asked. State inspection team showed up unannounced. "Yesterday afternoon," Tommy explained, keeping his voice low, "found some irregularities in our waste disposal records and shut down the hydraulic system until we can prove compliance. No lifts, no major repairs, and Derek's scrambling to find someone who can get us back online before we lose half our customer base." Maya glanced around the shop, noting the vehicles that sat motionless in their bays, waiting for work that couldn't be completed without the ability to lift them safely. It was the kind of operational crisis that could cripple a small business, especially one that operated on the thin margins that characterized most independent auto repair shops. "How long until the hydraulic system is cleared?" she asked. "Could be days," Jake said, joining the conversation with a coffee cup in his hands and worry etched across his features. "The inspector wants documentation going back 3 years. And you know how Derek is with paperwork. Plus, there's something about improper disposal of transmission fluid and brake cleaner. Apparently, we've been using the wrong containers for hazardous waste." Maya absorbed this information with the same calm attention she brought to diagnosing complex mechanical problems. Environmental compliance wasn't glamorous, but it was critical for any operation that handled the chemicals and fluids that were part of automotive repair. The fact that Riverside Auto had been operating with improper procedures suggested a level of carelessness that went beyond simple oversight. "What about the emergency repairs?" she asked, thinking of the customers who couldn't wait days for their vehicles to be returned to service. That's the real problem, Tommy said. Mrs. Chun's Camry threw a rod bearing yesterday, and she needs it back by Thursday for her daughter's wedding. The Martinez family van won't start at all, and they've got 4 kids who need to get to school. Derek's trying to farm out the work to other shops, but everyone's booked solid. Maya walked to the Camry and popped the hood, examining the engine with practiced eyes. A thrown rod bearing was serious damage that would require either engine replacement or a complete rebuild. Under normal circumstances, it would be a straightforward but time-consuming repair that could be handled in-house with the proper equipment. But without access to the hydraulic lifts, the job became exponentially more complicated. The engine would need to be removed from above, using a combination of engine hoists and careful maneuvering that required both skill and the right equipment. Maya ran through the process mentally, calculating the challenges and considering alternative approaches. Derek's talking about renting a mobile lift, Jake said, following her train of thought. But the cost is going to eat up most of the profit, and we still don't have the right workspace for an engine rebuild. Maya nodded, understanding the financial pressure that Derek was facing. Riverside Auto wasn't a large operation, and the combination of lost revenue from the shutdown and the additional costs of alternative solutions could seriously damage the business. She had seen small operations fail under less pressure, and despite her frustrations with Derek's management style, she didn't want to see the shop go under. What about floor jacks and jack stands, she suggested. Not ideal for major work, but possible if you're careful about safety protocols. Tommy shook his head. Derek's insurance won't cover us if we try to do engine work without proper lifts. Too much liability if something goes wrong. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb, a customer Maya recognized from previous visits. Marcus owned a small construction company and relied on his fleet of work trucks to keep his business running. His Ford F-350 had been scheduled for a transmission service, work that required access to the underside of the vehicle. "I heard you guys are having some problems," Marcus said to Derek, who had finished his phone call and approached with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "Please tell me my truck isn't going to be stuck here for a week." Derek launched into an explanation of the situation, emphasizing the temporary nature of the shutdown and promising that normal operations would resume as soon as the compliance issues were resolved. Marcus listened with growing frustration, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke. "Look, Derek, I understand you've got regulatory problems, but I've got 3 job sites that need equipment moved this week. That truck isn't just transportation, it's how I make my living. If I can't pull my equipment trailer, I might as well shut down my operation too." Maya watched the exchange with growing unease. She could see the stress in both men's faces, the pressure that came from circumstances beyond their immediate control. Marcus wasn't being unreasonable in his demands, and Derek wasn't being negligent in his response. It was simply a situation where the normal solutions weren't available. "What if we could service the transmission without using the lifts?" Maya said quietly. Both men turned to look at her with expressions that suggested she had just proposed something impossible. Derek's eyebrows rose skeptically, while Marcus looked hopeful despite his obvious doubts. "Maya, transmission work requires access to the underside of the vehicle," Derek said with exaggerated patience. "Without the hydraulic lifts, there's no safe way to get underneath a truck that size." "There are other ways," Maya replied. "Drive-on ramps, properly rated jack stands, even a pit if you had access to one. The military services vehicles in field conditions all the time without hydraulic lifts." The mention of military procedures seemed to catch everyone's attention, though Maya didn't immediately realize the significance of what she had revealed. Derek studied her with new interest, while Tommy and Jake exchanged glances that suggested this was the first time Maya had mentioned any military connection. You were in the military? Derek asked. Maya realized her mistake immediately, but decided that partial honesty was better than an obvious evasion. I did some vehicle maintenance work, she said carefully. You learn to be resourceful when you don't have access to a fully equipped shop. Derek's expression shifted as he processed this new information about his quietest employee. Maya could see him reevaluating his assumptions about her background and her persistent attention to detail. The military connection explained some things about her approach to work, though it also raised new questions about why she had ended up at a small-town auto repair shop. What kind of vehicles? Marcus asked with the interest of someone who had dealt with military contractors in his construction work. Mostly trucks and utility vehicles, Maya replied, keeping her answer vague while technically accurate. Heavy equipment that needed to stay operational regardless of conditions. This seemed to satisfy Marcus's curiosity, though Maya could see that Derek was filing the information away for future consideration. She had revealed more about herself in the past 5 minutes than she had in the previous 6 months, and the attention made her uncomfortable. So you think you could service my transmission without the lifts? Marcus asked, bringing the conversation back to his immediate problem. Maya examined the F-35O more carefully, noting its ground clearance and the accessibility of the transmission components. It wasn't ideal, but it was possible with the right approach and proper safety precautions. She had worked on much larger vehicles under much worse conditions, though she couldn't say that without revealing more about her background than she was prepared to discuss. It would take longer, she said finally, and we'd need to be extremely careful about safety procedures. But yes, it's possible. Derek considered this proposal with the expression of someone weighing risks against potential rewards. The insurance concerns were real, but so was the pressure to keep customers satisfied and revenue flowing. Marcus represented a significant portion of their commercial business, and losing him could have long-term consequences for the shop. What about liability? Derek asked. If something goes wrong working under the truck with jack stands, we could be looking at serious problems. That's why you follow proper procedures, Maya said. Multiple redundant support points, proper weight distribution, and constant safety monitoring. It's not inherently more dangerous than using hydraulic lifts if you do it right. Marcus looked between Derek and Maya with the expression of someone who sensed an opportunity, but wasn't sure if it was worth pursuing. I'm willing to sign a waiver, he said. My insurance covers equipment damage, and I trust you guys to know what you're doing. Derek wavered for another moment before nodding reluctantly. All right, Maya, show me what you have in mind. But we do this by the book, with every safety precaution you can think of. Maya spent the next hour outlining her approach to the transmission service, sketching out the jackstand placement and explaining the sequence of operations that would allow safe access to the transmission components. Her presentation was thorough and professional, delivered with the kind of confident precision that suggested extensive experience with exactly this type of improvised repair work. As she spoke, Maya could feel the attention of everyone in the shop focused on her in a way that hadn't happened before. Derek asked detailed questions about load calculations and safety margins, while Tommy and Jake listened with expressions that ranged from skepticism to grudging admiration. Even Linda had drifted over from the service counter to hear the unusual discussion. You've really done this before, Derek said when Maya finished her explanation. It wasn't quite a question, but there was an undertone that suggested he was beginning to reassess his assumptions about her capabilities. Field maintenance requires adaptability, Maya replied. You use the tools and methods available to get the job done safely. The work began with Maya directing the placement of heavy-duty jack stands and steel ramps that Derek had located in the shop's storage area. She insisted on testing each support point multiple times, checking for stability and proper weight distribution with the methodical attention to detail that had become her signature. But there was something different about her approach to this particular job. a level of precision and systematic thinking that went beyond her usual thoroughness. She seemed to anticipate problems before they developed and had solutions ready for complications that hadn't yet occurred. Her movements under the vehicle were confident and efficient, as if she were working in conditions she had encountered many times before. Tommy watched from a distance as Maya positioned herself beneath the F350, her small frame disappearing into the maze of mechanical components with practiced ease. "She moves like she's done this 1,000 times, he said to Jake, who was also observing the unusual repair procedure. "More like 10,000 times, Jake replied. "Look at how she's positioning those tools. Every movement is deliberate, like she's following a manual that exists only in her head." Maya's voice carried clearly from beneath the truck as she called out instructions for specific tools and described what she was finding as she worked. Her commentary was precise and technical, using terminology that suggested formal training rather than casual experience. She identified wear patterns in the transmission components with the confidence of someone who had seen similar problems many times before. "The torque converter seal is compromised," she announced, "but the internal damage is minimal. The contamination pattern suggests inadequate fluid changes rather than component failure. We can service this system and expect normal lifespan if the maintenance schedule is improved." Derek knelt beside the truck to get a better view of Maya's work. What he saw was a level of mechanical expertise that he hadn't fully appreciated during her 6 months at the shop. Her diagnostic skills were clearly superior to what he had assumed, and her approach to problem-solving suggested training that went well beyond typical automotive education. "Maya," he said, "where exactly did you learn to work on transmissions?" "Like this?" The question hung in the air beneath the truck, and Maya's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration. "Military vehicles use similar transmission systems," she said finally. "The principles are the same regardless of the application." It was another partial truth, but one that raised as many questions as it answered. Derek found himself wondering what other skills Maya possessed that she hadn't revealed, and why someone with her obvious expertise was working at a small independent repair shop for wages that barely covered basic living expenses. The transmission service continued throughout the morning, with Maya working steadily under conditions that would have challenged most mechanics. Her endurance was remarkable, and her sustained focus on the detailed work never seemed to waver. She emerged periodically to request specific tools or fluids, but always returned to her position beneath the truck with the kind of determined professionalism that Derek was beginning to recognize as characteristic of military training. "She's not just mechanically skilled," Linda observed quietly to Derek as they watched Maya work. "She's organized like someone who's been trained to work under pressure. Look at how she arranges her tools, how she sequences her operations. That's not something you pick up working on civilian vehicles." Derek nodded, recognizing the truth in Linda's observation. Maya's approach to work had always been more systematic than her colleagues, but he had attributed that to personal preference rather than professional training. Now he was beginning to see patterns that suggested a level of discipline and expertise that didn't match her humble position at Riverside Auto. The transmission service was completed by early afternoon, and Maya emerged from beneath the F350 with oil stains on her coveralls but satisfaction in her expression. The work had been executed flawlessly, with every component properly serviced and all safety protocols meticulously followed. Marcus started the truck and drove it through a series of test procedures, confirming that the transmission was operating smoothly and efficiently. "Outstanding work," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "I don't know how you managed it without the lifts, but this is better service than I've gotten at some of the big chain shops. Derek, you've got a real professional working for you." Derek accepted the praise on behalf of the shop, but his attention remained focused on Maya as she cleaned her tools with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. The successful completion of the challenging repair had impressed everyone in the shop, but it had also raised questions about Maya's background that Derek wasn't sure how to address. As the afternoon progressed, word of Maya's improvised repair work spread among the other customers who were waiting for their vehicles to be returned to service. Several approached Derek to ask if similar solutions might be available for their own repair needs, creating opportunities to keep the shop operating despite the continued hydraulic system shutdown. Maya found herself consulted on increasingly complex problems as Derek began to rely on her expertise to navigate the crisis. A customer's BMW had developed a sophisticated electronic issue that required diagnostic equipment and repair techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was typically available at an independent shop. Another vehicle needed suspension work that would normally require hydraulic lifts but might be manageable with creative use of alternative lifting methods. Each challenge revealed more about Maya's capabilities, and with each successful solution, Derek's perception of his quietest employee continued to evolve. She approached problems with a systematic methodology that suggested formal technical training, and her troubleshooting skills were clearly superior to those of the other mechanics in the shop. "Maya," Derek said during a brief break in the afternoons. "Activities. I think we need to talk. Your background seems to be more extensive than you initially indicated, and I'm starting to wonder if you're working below your skill level here." Maya paused in her organization of tools, recognizing that the conversation she had been avoiding for 6 months was finally unavoidable. Derek's tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an undertone of curiosity that suggested he was prepared to press for more complete answers than she had provided so far. "I have the skills needed to do the job," she said carefully. "My background isn't really relevant to the work we do here." "Maybe not usually," Derek replied, "but today it made the difference between shutting down completely and keeping our customers satisfied. I think it's very relevant, and I think you're selling yourself short by not being more open about your qualifications." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a state police cruiser, its driver clearly in distress as he pulled into the service bay. The officer who emerged was young and obviously worried, explaining that his patrol vehicle had developed a critical problem while he was responding to a call on the interstate. "The engine's overheating, and I'm losing power," he explained to Derek. "I can't get back to the state garage, and dispatch needs me back on the road as soon as possible. Can you help?" Derek examined the patrol car, noting the steam rising from under the hood and the warning lights that indicated serious cooling system problems. Under normal circumstances, it would be a straightforward repair requiring access to the engine cooling components. But without the hydraulic lifts, the work would be significantly more complicated. "This is going to be challenging without our normal equipment," Derek began, but Maya stepped forward before he could continue. "I can handle it," she said with quiet confidence. "It's probably a blown radiator hose or a failed thermostat. Either way, it's manageable with hand tools and floor access." The state trooper looked at Maya with the expression of someone who wasn't sure whether to be hopeful or skeptical. She was clearly the smallest person in the shop, and her quiet demeanor didn't immediately inspire confidence in someone facing an emergency situation. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this vehicle needs to be back in service immediately. Are you sure you can handle a repair like this?" Maya met his gaze directly, and Derek noticed something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. There was a steadiness there, a confidence that seemed to come from experience with situations far more challenging than a simple automotive repair emergency. "I'm sure," she said simply. The patrol car's problem turned out to be exactly what Maya had predicted: a catastrophic failure of the upper radiator hose that had caused the engine to overheat and lose power. But the repair was complicated by the vehicle's extensive electronic systems and the specialized cooling requirements of a police interceptor package. Maya approached the work with the same systematic precision she had shown on the transmission service, but there was an added intensity to her focus that suggested she understood the importance of getting the officer back on the road quickly. She worked with remarkable speed while maintaining her characteristic attention to detail, replacing not just the failed hose, but also inspecting and replacing the thermostat and checking the entire cooling system for potential problems. "You've worked on police vehicles before," the trooper observed as he watched Maya efficiently navigate the complex engine bay. "Similar vehicles," Maya replied without elaborating further. But Derek noticed that her familiarity with the patrol car's systems went beyond casual similarity. She seemed to know exactly where to find specific components, and her repair procedures followed protocols that suggested formal training on law enforcement vehicles. She completed the work in less than an hour, testing the cooling system thoroughly before declaring the vehicle ready for service. The trooper was clearly impressed with both the quality and speed of the repair. "Outstanding work," he said as he prepared to leave. "I'll make sure my sergeant knows about the service you provided here. We appreciate having a shop we can count on for emergency repairs." As the patrol car disappeared into the afternoon traffic, Derek found himself studying Maya with new eyes. The day's events had revealed capabilities that went far beyond what he had expected from any of his mechanics, and her familiarity with specialized vehicles suggested a background that was significantly more complex than she had indicated. "Maya," he said, "I think it's time for that conversation we started earlier. Today has shown me that you're working well below your potential here, and I'm starting to think there's a lot about your background that I don't understand." Maya finished securing her tools, taking extra time to ensure everything was properly organized before responding. She could feel the attention of everyone in the shop focused on her, and she realized that her attempts to maintain a low profile had been undermined by the day's events. "What do you want to know?" she asked finally. Derek gestured toward his office, indicating that the conversation should continue in private. As they walked across the shop floor, Maya was aware of the curious glances from Tommy, Jake, and Linda. The quiet mechanic who had worked among them for 6 months had revealed skills that none of them had suspected, and she could see the questions forming in their expressions. The office was small and cluttered, dominated by Derek's desk and filing cabinets stuffed with years of automotive repair records. Derek closed the door and gestured for Maya to take a seat, then settled behind his desk with the expression of someone preparing for a significant discussion. "Maya, I've been managing this shop for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone work the way you did today. Your diagnostic skills, your systematic approach to problem solving, your familiarity with specialized vehicles, none of that fits with the resume you gave me when you started here." Maya sat quietly, recognizing that the moment for partial truths and careful evasions had passed. Derek wasn't being confrontational, but his questions were direct and deserved honest answers. "My background is more technical than I initially indicated," she said carefully. "I have extensive experience with vehicle maintenance and repair, but in a different context than civilian automotive work." "Military context," Derek said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded. "Yes, what branch, what kind of work?" The questions were getting more specific, and Maya realized she would need to provide enough detail to satisfy Derek's curiosity without revealing information that might create additional complications. "Army," she said. "I was a motor transport operator and mechanic. I worked on everything from light utility vehicles to heavy equipment transporters." Derek absorbed this information, mentally connecting it to the skills Maya had demonstrated throughout the day. Military vehicle maintenance would indeed explain her systematic approach and her familiarity with complex mechanical systems. But there was something in her demeanor that suggested her military experience had been more significant than routine maintenance work. "How long?" he asked. 12 years. Derek's eyebrows rose at this revelation. 12 years of military service. suggested a level of experience and responsibility that went far beyond entry-level mechanical work. It also raised questions about why someone with that background would be working at a small civilian repair shop for wages that barely covered basic living expenses. Maya, someone with 12 years of military vehicle maintenance experience, should be running their own shop or working as a senior technician at a major dealership. Why are you here? The question cut to the heart of Maya's situation, and she realized there was no way to answer it without revealing more about her circumstances than she was comfortable discussing. But Derek had been patient with her evasions, and the days. Events had demonstrated that her cover story was no longer sustainable. The transition to civilian life has been more challenging than I expected, she said finally. My military experience doesn't always translate directly to civilian employment, and I needed a job that would provide steady income while I figured out my next steps. It was true as far as it went, but Derek sensed there was more to the story than Maya was revealing. Her reluctance to discuss details suggested complications that went beyond simple career transition difficulties. Maya, I don't know what challenges you're facing, but I want you to know that you're a valuable member of our team. Today proved that you have skills that go far beyond what we've been utilizing, and I'd like to discuss how we might better match your responsibilities to your capabilities. The offer was generous and unexpected, but Maya found herself hesitating to accept it. Increased responsibilities would mean increased visibility, and increased visibility was something she had been trying to avoid since arriving at Riverside. Otto, I appreciate the offer, she said, but I'm comfortable with my current role. I don't need additional responsibilities or recognition. Derek studied her expression, noting the tension that had appeared when he mentioned increased visibility. There was clearly more to Maya's situation than career transition difficulties, and her reluctance to accept advancement suggested she was trying to maintain a low profile for reasons he didn't understand. Is there something I should know about your situation? He asked gently. If you're having problems that affect your work or your safety, I'd like to help if I can. Maya appreciated Derek's concern, but she wasn't prepared to discuss the complexities of her transition from military to civilian life, or the reason she had chosen to work at a small-town repair shop under circumstances that didn't fully utilize her training and experience. There's nothing that affects my work performance, she said. I'm just someone who prefers to keep a low profile and focus on doing good work rather than seeking advancement or recognition. Derek accepted this explanation, though he remained curious about the underlying reasons for Maya's approach to her career. The conversation had answered some of his questions about her background while raising others about her motivations and circumstances. All right, he said finally. But I want you to know that the offer stands. If you ever decide you want to take on additional responsibilities, or if your situation changes, we can discuss expanding your role here. Maya thanked him for his understanding and returned to the shop floor, where she found Tommy and Jake waiting with barely concealed curiosity about her private conversation with Derek. She could see the questions in their expressions, but she wasn't prepared to continue the revelations that had already exposed more about her background than she had intended. Everything all right? Tommy asked with studied casualness. Fine, Maya replied. Derek wanted to discuss today's work. Jake nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation. The day's events had revealed capabilities that none of them had suspected, and Maya's continued reluctance to discuss her background only added to the mystery surrounding her presence at Riverside Auto. As the workday ended and the shop prepared to close, Maya found herself reflecting on the day's events and their implications for her continued employment. She had successfully helped Derek navigate the crisis created by the hydraulic system shutdown, but in doing so, she had revealed skills and knowledge that didn't match her intended low profile. The attention she had attracted was exactly what she had been trying to avoid, and she wondered if her position at Riverside Auto was still sustainable. Derek's offer of increased responsibilities was generous, but accepting it would mean abandoning the anonymity that had been one of her primary reasons for choosing this particular job. As she gathered her tools and prepared to leave, Maya realized that the careful balance she had maintained for 6 months was no longer stable. The day's emergencies had forced her to reveal capabilities that raised questions she wasn't prepared to answer, and the increased scrutiny from her colleagues was something she would need to manage carefully. The drive home to her apartment gave Maya time to consider her options and plan her next steps. She had successfully navigated the immediate crisis, but the long-term implications of her revelations remained uncertain. The skills that had made her invaluable during the day's emergencies were the same skills that complicated her efforts to maintain a simple, anonymous existence in civilian life. Maya parked outside her apartment building and sat in her car for a moment, watching the ordinary evening activities of her neighbors and thinking about the gap between the person she had been and the person she was trying to become. The transition was proving more complicated than she had anticipated, and the day's events had reminded her that some aspects of her background were impossible to completely conceal. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment and unlocked the door to the sparse space she had called home for the past 6 months. The apartment was functional but minimal, containing only the essentials needed for basic living. Maya had deliberately avoided accumulating possessions that might complicate another potential move, though she was beginning to wonder if constant mobility was sustainable in the long term. As she changed out of her work clothes, Maya caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and paused to examine her reflection. The woman looking back at her was different from the person who had entered military service 12 years earlier, shaped by experiences that had left marks both visible and hidden. The transition to civilian life had required her to suppress aspects of herself that had once defined her identity, and the day's events had reminded her how difficult that suppression could be to maintain. Maya prepared a simple dinner and sat at her small kitchen table, thinking about Derek's offer and the implications of accepting or declining it. Increased responsibilities at Riverside Auto would mean better pay and more challenging work, but they would also mean increased visibility and the potential for additional questions about her background. The phone rang as she finished eating, and Maya answered to find Derek on the line with another crisis that required her expertise. A customer's vehicle had broken down on the interstate, and the towing service had delivered it to the shop after hours. The problem was complex and urgent, requiring immediate attention from someone with the skills to diagnose and repair sophisticated mechanical issues under less than ideal conditions. "I know it's after hours," Derek said, "but the customer is stranded, and I think you're the only one who can handle this particular problem. Would you be willing to come back in?" Maya considered the request, recognizing both the opportunity to help and the potential for further revealing her capabilities. But the customer's situation was genuinely urgent, and she found herself unable to decline assistance when it was needed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. As she drove back to Riverside Auto through the quiet evening streets, Maya realized that her attempts to maintain anonymity were being gradually undermined by circumstances beyond her control. Each crisis that required her expertise brought additional attention and raised new questions about her background and capabilities. The shop was dark, except for the security lighting when Maya arrived, and Derek met her at the entrance with keys and a brief explanation of the situation. The stranded vehicle was a late-model sedan with sophisticated electronic systems that had failed in a way that suggested either computer problems or complex electrical issues. Maya approached the diagnostic challenge with the same systematic methodology she had demonstrated throughout the day, but working alone in the quiet shop gave her the opportunity to fully utilize skills that she had been carefully moderating during normal business hours. Her diagnostic procedures were more advanced than what would typically be expected at an independent repair shop, and her familiarity with complex electronic systems revealed training that went beyond routine automotive education. The problem proved to be a cascade failure in the vehicle's computerized systems, triggered by a seemingly minor sensor malfunction that had caused multiple related systems to shut down as a protective measure. Maya identified the root cause and developed a repair strategy that would restore functionality while preventing similar failures in the future. Working alone allowed her to demonstrate the full extent of her capabilities without the scrutiny of her colleagues, and she found herself appreciating the opportunity to tackle a challenging problem without the need to moderate her approach or conceal her expertise. The repair work proceeded smoothly, with Maya's systematic troubleshooting revealing not just the immediate problem, but also several potential issues that could be addressed preventively. Derek returned to check on her progress and found Maya deep in the vehicle's electronic systems, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and technical manuals. Her approach to the complex repair was clearly professional, executed with the kind of confident precision that suggested extensive experience with similar problems. "How's it looking?" he asked. "Complicated but manageable," Maya replied without looking up from her work. The sensor failure triggered protective shutdowns in multiple systems, but the underlying damage is minimal. "I can have it running reliably again, but it's going to take several more hours." Derek watched her work for a few minutes, noting the advanced diagnostic techniques she was using and the sophisticated understanding of electronic systems that her procedures revealed. The quiet mechanic who had worked among them for 6 months was clearly operating at a level that exceeded anything he had previously observed. "Maya," he said, "I've been thinking about our conversation this afternoon, and I have to ask, what kind of military vehicles were you working on? Because what you're doing here goes way beyond routine truck maintenance." Maya paused in her work, recognizing that Derek's question was both perceptive and difficult to answer without revealing more about her background than she was prepared to discuss. The electronic diagnostic techniques she was using did indeed go beyond what would be expected from routine military vehicle maintenance, and her systematic approach to complex problems suggested training that was more specialized than she had indicated. "I worked on a variety of vehicles," she said carefully. "Some of them had sophisticated systems that required advanced diagnostic skills." Derek nodded, but his expression suggested he understood that Maya's answer was deliberately vague. The skills she was demonstrating were clearly the result of extensive training and experience, and her reluctance to provide specific details only added to his curiosity about her actual background. "Would you be willing to take on more of our complex diagnostic work?" he asked. "I'm starting to realize we've been underutilizing your capabilities, and I'd like to change that if you're interested." Maya considered the offer while continuing her work on the vehicle's electronic systems. Accepting additional responsibilities would mean better compensation and more challenging work, but it would also mean increased visibility and the potential for questions that she wasn't prepared to answer. "Let me think about it," she said finally. Derek accepted this response and left Maya to continue her work, but not before expressing his appreciation for her willingness to handle the after-hours emergency. As she worked alone in the quiet shop, Maya found herself thinking about the choices she was facing and the implications of each potential path forward. The repair was completed successfully in the early hours of the morning, with Maya restoring full functionality to the vehicle's complex electronic systems and implementing preventive measures to avoid similar failures in the future. The customer would be able to retrieve their vehicle in the morning and continue their journey without further delays. As Maya locked up the shop and prepared to return home, she realized that the day's events had fundamentally changed her situation at Riverside Auto. Her skills and background were no longer secret, and Derek's recognition of her capabilities had created opportunities that she would need to carefully consider. The drive home through the empty streets gave Maya time to reflect on the distance between her current situation and the life she had left behind when she separated from military service. The transition had been more difficult than she had anticipated, complicated by factors that went beyond simple career adjustment and made her reluctant to fully engage with the opportunities that her skills and experience might provide. Maya arrived at her apartment as dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Tired from the long day, but satisfied with the successful completion of challenging work that had utilized her full capabilities. The repairs she had completed would keep customers mobile and Derek's business operational during a difficult period, but they had also revealed aspects of her background that would require careful management in the days ahead. As she prepared for bed, Maya wondered if her time at Riverside Auto was approaching a natural transition point. The skills she had revealed were creating opportunities for advancement, but they were also attracting attention that she had been trying to avoid. The balance between utilizing her capabilities and maintaining her privacy was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. The next morning would bring new challenges and decisions, but for now, Maya was content to rest and prepare for whatever developments might emerge from the day's revelations. Her expertise had proved invaluable during a crisis, but the long-term implications of stepping out of the shadows remained to be determined. The morning brought unexpected visitors to Riverside Auto, their arrival marked by the distinctive sound of heavy-duty vehicles pulling into the service bay. Maya looked up from the brake job she was finishing to see 3 military Humvees parked outside, their desert camouflage paint and tactical equipment immediately recognizable to anyone with military experience. Derek emerged from his office with a puzzled expression, clearly unsure why a military convoy had chosen his small repair shop for whatever assistance they might need. The lead vehicle's driver, a sergeant in Army combat uniforms, approached the service counter with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to getting things done efficiently. "We've got a mechanical emergency," the sergeant explained to Derek. "Our lead vehicle developed transmission problems about 10 miles out, and we need immediate assistance. We're part of a convoy moving critical equipment to Fort Carson, and we can't afford delays." Derek glanced around the shop, noting that his hydraulic system was still offline and his most experienced mechanics were already committed to other urgent repairs. The military vehicles were significantly larger and more complex than the civilian automobiles they typically serviced, and the sergeant's emphasis on urgency suggested that this wasn't a routine maintenance request. "I'm not sure we have the equipment to handle military vehicles," Derek began, but Maya stepped forward before he could continue. "I can take a look," she said quietly. The sergeant studied Maya with the appraising gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel under pressure. Her small stature and civilian clothes didn't immediately inspire confidence, but there was something in her bearing that suggested competence beyond her appearance. "Ma'am, these are specialized vehicles with combat modifications," the sergeant said politely but firmly. "They require familiarity with military systems and procedures." Maya met his gaze directly, and Derek noticed the same steady confidence he had observed during the previous day's emergencies. "I understand," she said. "Simply, what's the nature of the transmission problem?" The sergeant described the symptoms with military precision: complete loss of power transmission during acceleration, accompanied by unusual noises and warning indicators on the vehicle's diagnostic display. Maya listened with the focused attention of someone who understood both the technical aspects of the problem and the operational implications of a disabled vehicle in a military convoy. "I'll need to examine the vehicle," she said. The sergeant hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing the urgency of his situation against the uncertainty of accepting assistance from an unknown civilian mechanic. But the convoy's schedule was critical, and alternatives were limited in their current location. "All right," he said finally, "but we need this resolved quickly. We're already behind schedule, and command is expecting us at Fort Carson by 1800 hours." Maya followed the sergeant to the lead Humvee, her movements taking on a subtle change that Derek noticed, but couldn't immediately identify. Her posture straightened slightly, and her pace matched the sergeant's military cadence automatically. When she reached the vehicle, she conducted a preliminary inspection with systematic efficiency that suggested familiarity with exactly this type of equipment. The Humvee was a up-armored variant with sophisticated communication equipment and tactical modifications that went well beyond standard civilian vehicle systems. Maya examined the exterior components with practiced eyes, noting details that would be invisible to someone without extensive military vehicle experience. "I'll need to get underneath," she told the sergeant. "Do you have portable lift equipment? Or are we working with field expedient methods?" The question surprised the sergeant, who hadn't expected a civilian mechanic to be familiar with military field maintenance terminology. "We've got jackstands and blocking," he replied, studying Maya with renewed interest. "Good. I'll also need access to your technical manuals and diagnostic equipment if you have them." The sergeant's eyebrows rose at this request. Military technical manuals and diagnostic procedures were specialized resources that civilian mechanics wouldn't normally know how to use effectively. Maya's casual reference to them suggested knowledge that went beyond routine automotive experience. "How familiar are you with military vehicles?" he asked. Maya paused in her examination of the Humvee's undercarriage, recognizing that her questions had revealed more about her background than she had intended. But the sergeant's situation was genuinely urgent, and helping him would require her to utilize knowledge and skills that couldn't be easily concealed. "I have some experience," she said carefully. Derek watched this exchange with growing curiosity. Maya's interaction with the sergeant was different from her usual communication style, more direct and confident. There was a subtle change in her demeanor that suggested she was operating in familiar territory despite the civilian setting. The sergeant produced a field manual and portable diagnostic unit from the Humvee's equipment kit, resources that Maya accepted with an ease that further confirmed his suspicions about her background. She connected the diagnostic equipment to the vehicle systems with practiced efficiency, navigating the military-specific interfaces without hesitation. "The transmission controller is reporting multiple fault codes," she announced after reviewing the diagnostic display. "Primary failure appears to be in the torque converter lockup system, with secondary issues in the valve body pressure regulation." The sergeant nodded, understanding the technical assessment, but clearly surprised by Maya's fluent use of military diagnostic terminology. "Can you repair it here?" Maya continued her examination, mentally calculating the complexity of the required work and the resources available at Riverside Auto. The repair would require specialized knowledge of military transmission systems and access to components that weren't typically stocked by civilian repair shops. "The lockup solenoid has failed," she said finally. "I can bypass the system temporarily to restore basic functionality, but you'll need proper replacement parts for a permanent repair." "How temporary?" the sergeant asked. "Enough to get you to Fort Carson, assuming normal driving conditions, and no additional failures. But the transmission will be operating at reduced efficiency, and you'll need to limit maximum speeds and avoid heavy acceleration." The sergeant considered this assessment, weighing the risks of continuing with compromised equipment against the consequences of missing their scheduled arrival time. Military logistics didn't allow for much flexibility, and a delayed convoy could disrupt operations that extended far beyond their immediate mission. "How long for the bypass repair?" he asked. Maya looked at the available workspace and the tools she would need, calculating the time required for work that would need to be executed with military precision despite civilian constraints. 2 hours if everything goes smoothly. "Do it." The work began with Maya directing the positioning of the Humvee and the placement of safety equipment with the same systematic approach she had demonstrated during the previous day's emergencies. But there was a noticeable difference in her authority and confidence when dealing with military equipment and procedures. She positioned herself beneath the vehicle with practiced efficiency, her movements showing familiarity with the specific layout and systems of military vehicles. Her diagnostic procedures followed protocols that were clearly based on formal training rather than improvised civilian techniques. Derek observed from a distance, noting the transformation in Maya's demeanor. As she worked on equipment that was obviously familiar to her, the quiet, reserved mechanic who had worked among them for 6 months had been replaced by someone who moved with military precision and spoke with technical authority that commanded immediate respect from the sergeant. "She knows these vehicles," Tommy said quietly to Jake as they watched Maya work. "Look at how she's accessing those systems. She's not figuring it out as she goes. She already knows exactly where everything is." Jake nodded, recognizing the same pattern they had observed during the previous day's emergency repairs. Maya's expertise with military equipment was clearly the result of extensive hands-on experience, not casual familiarity or quick learning. The sergeant stood beside the Humvee, monitoring Maya's progress with the attention of someone who understood both the technical challenges and the operational implications of the repair work. Occasionally he asked questions about her procedures or offered assistance with specific tools, but it was clear that Maya's expertise exceeded his own mechanical knowledge. "You've worked on these before," the sergeant said. It wasn't quite a question, but there was an undertone that suggested he was seeking confirmation of what he had already concluded. "Yes," Maya replied without elaborating further. "What unit?" The question hung in the air beneath the Humvee, and Maya's response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration of how much information to reveal. She was committed to helping with the repair, but discussing her military background remained something she preferred to avoid. "I was a motor transport operator," she said finally, using the same partial truth she had given Derek the previous day. The sergeant accepted this answer, though his expression suggested he suspected there was more to Maya's story than routine motor transport work. Her familiarity with specialized diagnostic equipment and advanced repair procedures indicated training that went beyond what would be expected from standard military vehicle maintenance positions. The repair work continued with Maya making steady progress on the complex transmission bypass procedure. Her movements were confident and efficient, executed with the kind of systematic precision that suggested she had performed similar repairs many times before under various conditions. Derek found himself watching the work with fascination, observing skills and knowledge that Maya had never revealed during her 6 months at Riverside Auto. Her interaction with the military personnel was markedly different from her usual reserved communication style, more direct and authoritative. "Maya," Derek called out, "do you need any assistance with specialized tools or equipment?" "I'm fine," Maya replied from beneath the Humvee. "The bypass is proceeding normally, and I should have power transmission restored within the estimated time frame." Her response was delivered with military-style brevity and precision, quite different from her usual civilian workplace communication. Derek noted the change and filed it away with the other observations he had been accumulating about Maya's background and capabilities. The other members of the military convoy had dismounted from their vehicles and were observing the repair work with professional interest. They were clearly experienced soldiers, and their assessment of Maya's work carried the weight of people who understood the importance of reliable equipment in operational environments. "She's good," one of the soldiers commented to his companion. "Look at how she's routing that bypass circuit. That's not something you learn from a manual." "Definitely been there before," the other soldier agreed. "Probably deployed. You can tell by how she handles the equipment." Maya could hear these conversations from her position beneath the vehicle, and she realized that her attempts to conceal her military background were being undermined by the very expertise that made her valuable in this situation. Every procedure she followed and every technique she employed revealed knowledge that could only have been acquired through extensive military experience. The transmission bypass was completed successfully, with Maya restoring basic power transmission, while implementing safeguards to prevent additional system failures during the convoy's continued journey. She emerged from beneath the Humvee with oil stains on her coveralls, but satisfaction in her expression. "The bypass is complete," she announced to the sergeant. "You'll have full power transmission for normal driving, but avoid heavy acceleration. And keep speeds below 60 miles per hour. The system should get you to Fort Carson without problems." The sergeant started the Humvee and drove it through a series of test procedures, confirming that the transmission was operating smoothly within the specified parameters. The repair had been executed flawlessly, restoring the vehicle's operational capability while implementing appropriate limitations to prevent further damage. "Outstanding work," the sergeant said as he prepared to rejoin the convoy. "I'll make sure my commander knows about the assistance you provided. We don't often find civilian mechanics who can handle military equipment this effectively." Derek accepted the praise on behalf of the shop, but his attention remained focused on Maya as she cleaned her tools with characteristic precision. The successful completion of the military vehicle repair had revealed capabilities that went far beyond anything he had previously observed, and the soldier's comments suggested that Maya's military experience had been more extensive than she had indicated. As the convoy prepared to depart, the sergeant approached Maya with a business card and a direct question that cut through the polite evasions she had been offering about her background. "Staff Sergeant Chun," he said, using what was clearly Maya's former military rank. "If you ever decide to return to military service, my unit could use someone with your expertise. We're always looking for experienced motor transport personnel, especially those with advanced diagnostic skills." The use of her former rank sent a shock through Maya that was visible to everyone watching. Derek's eyes widened as he realized that the quiet mechanic he had been employing was a former non-commissioned officer with specialized military training, while Tommy and Jake exchanged glances that confirmed their growing suspicions about Maya's background. "I appreciate the offer," Maya replied carefully, "but I'm committed to civilian employment now." The sergeant nodded understandingly. "I figured as much, but the offer stands if your situation changes. Your skills are too valuable to waste, and there are opportunities in the military that would better match your capabilities." As the convoy departed, leaving Riverside Auto returning to its normal civilian routine, Maya found herself facing the intense scrutiny of her colleagues. The revelation of her former military rank had confirmed their suspicions while raising new questions about her transition to civilian life and her current employment at a small-town repair shop. "Staff Sergeant?" Derek said, breaking the silence that had settled over the shop. "Maya, why didn't you tell me you were a non-commissioned officer? That changes everything about your qualifications and experience." Maya realized that her careful efforts to conceal her military background had been completely undermined by the morning's events. The sergeant's recognition and use of her former rank had revealed information that she had been trying to keep private, forcing her to confront questions that she had been avoiding for months. "My military service is in the past," she said carefully. "I'm trying to build a civilian career now, and I didn't think my former rank was relevant to automotive repair work." Derek shook his head in disbelief. Maya, a staff sergeant with advanced mechanical training, should be running her own shop or working as a senior technician at a major dealership. You're working here for wages that don't even begin to reflect your actual qualifications. The observation was accurate but uncomfortable, touching on aspects of Maya's situation that she wasn't prepared to discuss openly. Her transition from military to civilian life had been complicated by factors that went beyond simple career adjustment, and her choice to work at Riverside Auto had been influenced by considerations that her colleagues couldn't understand without knowing more about her circumstances. "Sometimes people need to start over," she said finally. "My military experience doesn't automatically translate to civilian success, and I needed a place where I could rebuild my career without the pressure of high expectations." Tommy stepped forward with an expression that mixed admiration with confusion. "Maya, we've been treating you like a beginner for 6 months, but you've got more experience than all of us combined. Why did you let us think you were just learning the trade?" The question cut to the heart of Maya's strategy for managing her transition to civilian life. She had deliberately downplayed her qualifications and experience, seeking anonymity and the opportunity to develop civilian workplace skills without the complications that might arise from revealing her military background. "I wanted to learn how civilian shops operate," she said. "Military and civilian automotive work are different in many ways, and I thought it would be better to observe and adapt rather than assuming my military training would automatically apply." Jake nodded slowly, beginning to understand the complexity of Maya's situation. "But you've been holding back this whole time. All those times when Derek questioned your diagnostic work or when we made jokes about your experience, you could have shut us up instantly by mentioning your background." Maya looked around the shop at the faces of her colleagues, reading the mixture of embarrassment and respect in their expressions. They were beginning to realize that their treatment of her had been based on false assumptions about her capabilities and experience, and that realization was creating discomfort that she had hoped to avoid. "I wasn't trying to deceive anyone," she said. "I just wanted to work quietly and prove myself through my performance rather than my credentials." Derek ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process the implications of what he had learned about Maya's background. "Maya, this changes everything. Your qualifications are completely different from what I understood, and I need to reassess your position here." The statement carried an undertone that made Maya nervous about her continued employment at Riverside Auto. She had been trying to maintain a low profile specifically to avoid the complications that might arise from revealing her true qualifications, and Derek's suggestion of reassessments suggested that her strategy had backfired. "I'm satisfied with my current position," she said quickly. "I don't need any changes or reassessments." Derek shook his head. "Maya, I can't continue paying you entry-level wages when you're clearly qualified for senior technician responsibilities. It's not fair to you, and it's not good business for me to underutilize someone with your expertise." The offer of increased compensation and responsibilities was generous, but Maya found herself reluctant to accept it for reasons that went beyond simple modesty. Higher profile positions meant increased visibility and scrutiny, which could lead to questions about her background that she wasn't prepared to answer fully. Before she could respond, the shop's phone rang with another emergency call. Derek answered and found himself speaking with the police dispatcher about a critical situation that required immediate automotive expertise. A suspected terrorist vehicle had been disabled during a high-speed pursuit, and the bomb squad needed mechanical assistance to safely access potential explosive devices hidden within the vehicle systems. "They're asking for our most experienced diagnostic technician," Derek said as he hung up the phone. "Someone who can work with law enforcement and understand sophisticated vehicle modifications." The request was clearly beyond the capabilities of Tommy or Jake, both of whom had extensive experience with routine automotive repair, but no background in the specialized procedures that might be required for bomb disposal support. Derek looked at Maya with an expression that suggested he already knew who would need to handle this particular emergency. "Maya, I know this is outside normal automotive work, but they specifically mentioned needing someone with military experience who could understand tactical vehicle modifications. Would you be willing to assist?" Maya felt the familiar tension that came with being asked to utilize skills and knowledge that she preferred to keep private. But the situation involved public safety and potential loss of life, making it impossible For her to decline assistance based purely on personal preferences. "What kind of assistance do they need?" she asked. Derek relayed the information he had received from the dispatcher. The disabled vehicle was a modified sedan with suspicious alterations to its electrical and fuel systems. The bomb squad needed someone who could safely disconnect the vehicle's power systems and identify any modifications that might be connected to explosive devices. Maya recognized immediately that this was exactly the kind of situation where her specialized military training would be most valuable and most dangerous to reveal. Working with law enforcement on a potential terrorism case would inevitably lead to background checks and scrutiny that could expose aspects of her military service that she had been carefully concealing. But the public safety implications were too serious to ignore, and Maya found herself unable to refuse assistance when lives might be at stake. "I'll help," she said finally. The drive to the scene took Maya and Derek through residential neighborhoods, where police had established a security perimeter around the disabled vehicle. The sedan sat in the middle of an intersection, surrounded by law enforcement vehicles and emergency response equipment. The bomb squad's mobile command unit was positioned at a safe distance, its sophisticated detection and disposal equipment ready for deployment. Maya was introduced to Lieutenant Rodriguez, the bomb squad commander, who briefed her on the situation with military-style precision. The suspect vehicle had been modified with additional electrical systems and fuel line alterations that suggested potential explosive devices. The bomb squad needed to safely power down the vehicle and examine its systems without triggering any booby traps that might be connected to the ignition or electrical systems. "We need someone who can understand the vehicle's original systems well enough to identify modifications," Lieutenant Rodriguez explained. "Our technical specialist is familiar with explosive devices, but we need automotive expertise to safely isolate the vehicle's power systems." Maya examined the information packet that Lieutenant Rodriguez provided, noting the photographs and technical specifications that the bomb squad had already compiled. The modifications were indeed suspicious, involving additional wiring harnesses and fuel system alterations that served no apparent legitimate purpose. "I can help," Maya said, "but I'll need access to the vehicle's technical documentation and diagnostic equipment that can interface with its computer systems." Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "We have portable diagnostic equipment, and we can access manufacturer technical data through our law enforcement networks. What's your background with this type of work?" The question was direct and professional, asked by someone who needed to understand Maya's qualifications before trusting her with a potentially dangerous technical operation. Maya realized that providing a vague answer about general automotive experience wouldn't be sufficient in this context. "I have military experience with vehicle modifications and improvised explosive device disposal," she said carefully, revealing more about her background than she had intended, but recognizing that the situation required honesty about her capabilities. Lieutenant Rodriguez's expression shifted as he processed this information. Military IED disposal experience was highly specialized training that suggested Maya's background was significantly more complex than that of a typical civilian automotive technician. "What unit?" he asked with the directness of someone accustomed to evaluating military credentials. Maya hesitated, recognizing that answering this question would expose aspects of her military service that she had been trying to keep private. But Lieutenant Rodriguez needed to understand her qualifications in order to safely utilize her assistance, and the public safety implications of the situation made complete honesty necessary. "Army EAD," she said finally, using the abbreviation for explosive ordnance disposal that immediately conveyed the specialized nature of her military training. Lieutenant Rodriguez's eyebrows rose at this revelation. EOD technicians were among the most highly trained specialists in the military, with expertise in explosive devices, advanced diagnostic procedures, and high-risk technical operations. Maya's background represented exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that the current situation required. "Staff Sergeant Chun," he said, clearly recognizing her name from military databases. "I should have realized. Your EOD background makes you the perfect person for this job. We need someone who can safely examine those vehicle modifications without triggering any explosive devices that might be connected to them." The use of her full military designation sent another shock through Maya, who realized that her attempts to maintain anonymity in civilian life were being systematically undermined by situations that required her to utilize her specialized training. Derek's expression showed his growing amazement at the revelations about Maya's background, while the law enforcement personnel around them began to treat her with the respect accorded to someone with proven expertise in dangerous technical operations. The approach to the suspect vehicle was conducted with military-style precision, with Maya wearing protective equipment and following established protocols for examining potentially booby-trapped devices. Her movements were confident and systematic, executed with the kind of calm professionalism that came from extensive experience with high-risk technical operations. The vehicle's modifications proved to be exactly what Maya had suspected based on the preliminary information. Additional wiring harnesses had been installed to connect improvised explosive devices to the vehicle's electrical system, while fuel line alterations had been made to create potential fire hazards. The work was crude but dangerous, designed to cause maximum damage if triggered by law enforcement intervention. Maya's diagnostic procedures followed protocols that were clearly based on military EOD training, systematically isolating each modified system while checking for trigger mechanisms that might detonate explosive devices. Her work was methodical and patient, executed with the understanding that a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. "The primary explosive device is connected to the ignition system," she announced to Lieutenant Rodriguez through her headset communication equipment. "Secondary devices are linked to the fuel pump and air conditioning compressor. I can safely isolate all of them, but it will require disconnecting main electrical harness and several fuel system components." Lieutenant Rodriguez monitored Maya's progress from the command unit, following established protocols for EOD operations, while coordinating with other law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation. Maya's expertise was proving invaluable for safely neutralizing the threat while preserving evidence that could be used in the prosecution of the suspected terrorists. The disarmament process took most of the afternoon, with Maya working carefully through each system to ensure that all explosive devices were safely isolated before allowing the bomb squad to remove them for analysis. Her procedures were flawless, executed with the kind of precision that prevented any accidental detonation while preserving the integrity of the evidence. When the operation was completed successfully, Lieutenant Rodriguez personally thanked Maya for her assistance and expressed his admiration for her professional competence under pressure. The explosive devices had been safely removed, and the suspect vehicle had been preserved for forensic analysis that could provide crucial information about the terrorist plot. "Outstanding work," Staff Sergeant Lieutenant Rodriguez said as the scene was being secured. "Your expertise made the difference between a successful operation and a potential disaster. If you ever decide to return to military service or consider law enforcement work, my department would be honored to have someone with your qualifications." Derek had observed the entire operation from the security perimeter, watching Maya demonstrate skills and knowledge that went far beyond anything he had imagined possible. The quiet mechanic who had worked at his shop for 6 months had revealed herself to be a highly trained military specialist with expertise in some of the most dangerous technical operations performed by the armed forces. As they drove back to Riverside Auto, Derek struggled to process everything he had learned about Maya's background and qualifications. "Maya," he said finally, "I don't even know what to say. You're not just a former staff sergeant. You're an EOD technician. That's some of the most specialized training in the military. Maya sat quietly in the passenger seat, recognizing that her careful efforts to conceal her military background had been completely exposed by the day's events. The law enforcement operation had required her to utilize skills that could only have been acquired through the most advanced military training programs, making it impossible to maintain the fiction that she was simply a former motor transport operator. EAD training was part of my military career, she said carefully. But that's in the past now. I'm trying to build a civilian life, and I don't want my military background to define my current identity. Derek shook his head in amazement. Maya, EOD technicians are among the most highly trained people in the world. Your expertise is incredibly valuable, and you're wasting it working at a small-town repair shop for entry-level wages. The observation was accurate but painful, highlighting the gap between Maya's actual qualifications and her current employment situation. She had chosen to work at Riverside Auto specifically because it allowed her to maintain a low profile while developing civilian workplace skills. But the day's revelations had made that strategy unsustainable. Sometimes starting over means accepting positions that don't fully utilize your previous experience, she said. I needed time to adjust to civilian life, and Riverside Auto provided that opportunity. Derek considered this explanation as they arrived back at the shop, where Tommy and Jake were waiting with obvious curiosity about the law enforcement emergency that had required Maya's specialized assistance. Word of her EA background had already begun to spread among the staff, creating a new level of respect and interest in her military service. Maya, Derek said as they entered the shop, I want to make you an offer that properly reflects your qualifications and experience. I'd like to promote you to senior diagnostic technician with a significant salary increase and profit-sharing participation. Your expertise is too valuable to waste, and I want to make sure you're properly compensated for your contributions. The offer was generous and represented exactly the kind of career advancement that Maya's qualifications justified. But accepting it would mean abandoning the anonymity and low profile that had been her primary reasons for choosing to work at Riverside Auto in the first place. I appreciate the offer, Maya said, but I need time to consider whether that kind of position is right for my current situation. Derek nodded understandingly, recognizing that Maya's hesitation was based on factors that went beyond simple career considerations. Her military background and specialized training created complications that he didn't fully understand, but he was beginning to appreciate the complexity of her transition to civilian life. Take all the time you need, he said. But I want you to know that the offer is genuine, and it's based on what you've demonstrated rather than just your military credentials. As the workday ended and the shop prepared to close, Maya found herself reflecting on how completely her situation had changed. The careful balance she had maintained for 6 months had been destroyed by a single day's events, exposing her military background and specialized training in ways that would be impossible to reverse. Tommy and Jake approached her with expressions that mixed respect with curiosity about her military service and the skills she had demonstrated during the law enforcement operation. Their previous casual treatment of her had been replaced by a recognition of her expertise that made future interactions inherently different. Maya, Tommy said, I owe you an apology. We've been treating you like a beginner when you've got more training and experience than anyone in this shop. I feel like an idiot for some of the things I said. Jake nodded in agreement. We had no idea about your background. EOD is serious business, and we've been acting like you were fresh out of trade school. I'm sorry about that. Maya appreciated their acknowledgement, but she also recognized that their newfound respect was exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid. Her military service had become the defining characteristic of how people viewed her, overshadowing her efforts to establish a civilian identity based on her current performance rather than her past achievements. You don't need to apologize, she said. I deliberately didn't discuss my military background because I wanted to be evaluated on my current work rather than my previous experience. Derek joined the conversation with an expression that suggested he was still processing the implications of Maya's revealed background. Maya, I understand why you might want to start fresh, but your military training is part of who you are. It's not something you should feel like you need to hide or apologize for. The observation was well-intentioned but complicated, touching on aspects of Maya's transition to civilian life that went beyond simple career preferences. Her military service had ended under circumstances that made her reluctant to discuss her background openly, and the day's revelations had exposed her to exactly the kind of scrutiny and attention that she had been trying to avoid. As Maya gathered her tools and prepared to leave Riverside Auto for another day, she realized that her time at the shop was approaching a natural transition point. Her military background was no longer secret, and the opportunities that Derek was offering would require her to fully embrace her specialized training and expertise. The drive home gave Maya time to consider her options and the implications of each potential path forward. She could accept Derek's offer and build a civilian career that properly utilized her military training, or she could seek employment elsewhere and attempt to re-establish the anonymity that had been destroyed by the day's events. Her apartment felt different when she arrived, less like a temporary refuge and more like a place where she would need to make decisions about her future. The simple furnishings and minimal possessions reflected her attempts to maintain mobility and avoid establishing deep connections that might complicate another potential move. Maya sat at her small kitchen table and considered the business card that Lieutenant Rodriguez had given her, along with similar cards from other law enforcement and military personnel who had expressed interest in her expertise. The opportunities were genuine and represented exactly the kind of career advancement that her qualifications justified. But accepting any of these opportunities would mean fully embracing her military identity and the specialized training that had defined her service career. The transition to civilian life that she had been attempting would be abandoned in favor of work that utilized her EOD expertise and maintained her connections to the military and law enforcement communities. As evening settled over her quiet neighborhood, Maya reflected on the distance between the person she had been trying to become and the person that circumstances seemed determined to reveal. Her military training and specialized expertise were integral parts of her identity, but they were also connections to a past that she had been trying to leave behind. The phone rang as she prepared dinner, and Maya answered to find Derek on the line with another opportunity that would require her specialized knowledge. A federal agency was requesting assistance with a complex investigation that involved modified vehicles and potential explosive devices, and they had specifically requested someone with EOD training and automotive expertise. I know it's a lot to ask, Derek said, but they're offering significant compensation for consulting work, and they specifically mentioned wanting someone with your qualifications. It could be the start of a very lucrative civilian career using your military expertise. Maya listened to the details of the opportunity, recognizing that it represented exactly the kind of work that would fully utilize her training while providing the financial security that had been missing from her employment at Riverside Auto. But it would also mean abandoning her attempts to establish a civilian identity separate from her military background. I'll consider it, she said finally. As she ended the call and returned to her dinner preparation, Maya realized that the decisions she was facing were more complex than simple career choices. The day's events had forced her to confront the reality that her military training and specialized expertise couldn't be easily separated from her civilian identity, and that attempting to do so might be preventing her from building the kind of life she actually wanted. The quiet evening gave Maya time to reflect on her goals and priorities, considering whether her attempts to maintain anonymity and avoid utilizing her military training were actually serving her best interests. The opportunities that were being offered represented recognition of her expertise and the potential for financial security that she hadn't experienced since leaving military service. Over the following days, Maya found herself at the center of increasing attention as word of her EOD background spread through the local law enforcement and emergency response communities. Her expertise was in demand for consulting work that would provide significant income, while utilizing her specialized training in meaningful ways. Derek's offer of promotion remained open, but it was increasingly clear that Maya's opportunities extended far beyond Riverside Auto. Her revealed military background had created possibilities that she couldn't have imagined when she first arrived at the small repair shop seeking simple employment that would allow her to maintain a low profile. The decision ultimately came down to whether Maya was ready to fully embrace her military identity and the expertise that came with it, or whether she would continue attempting to build a civilian life that didn't fully utilize her training and experience. The day's revelations had made it clear that her military background couldn't be easily concealed, and that her specialized skills were too valuable to remain unused. Maya made her decision on a quiet Thursday morning, arriving at Riverside Auto with a sense of clarity about her future that had been missing for months. Derek was waiting with another consulting opportunity that would require her EOD expertise, but Maya had already determined how she wanted to respond to the increasing demand for her specialized knowledge. "Derek," she said, "I've decided to accept your offer of promotion to senior diagnostic technician. But I also want to establish a consulting practice that can handle the specialized work that's been coming in." Riverside Auto could become the base for both civilian automotive work and government consulting that requires EOD expertise. Derek's face lit up with enthusiasm for the proposal. "Maya, that's brilliant. We could expand the shop's capabilities while establishing a new revenue stream that takes advantage of your specialized training. It would be a win for everyone involved." The plan that Maya outlined would allow her to maintain her connection to Riverside Auto while developing a consulting practice that properly utilized her military expertise. She would no longer need to conceal her background or work below her qualifications, but she could build a civilian career that incorporated rather than abandoned her specialized training. Tommy and Jake expressed enthusiastic support for Maya's expanded role, recognizing that her expertise would elevate the shop's reputation while providing opportunities for them to learn advanced diagnostic and repair techniques. The dynamic at Riverside Auto had been permanently changed by the revelations about Maya's background, but the change was creating opportunities rather than problems. As Maya began implementing her new role at the shop, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from anonymous mechanic to recognized expert in specialized automotive and EOD work. The transition to civilian life had been more complex than she had anticipated, but the ultimate outcome was a career that honored both her military service and her civilian aspirations. The consulting work that began flowing in provided Maya with the financial security she had been seeking while allowing her to utilize her expertise in meaningful ways that served public safety and national security interests. Her military training had become an asset rather than a burden, integrated into a civilian career that provided both personal satisfaction and professional recognition. Maya's story had become one of successful transition from military to civilian life, but not through the abandonment of her specialized training. Instead, she had found a way to integrate her EOD expertise into a civilian career that provided the stability and recognition that her qualifications deserved. The quiet mechanic who had worked anonymously at Riverside Auto for 6 months had revealed herself to be one of the most highly trained technical specialists in the country, and her expertise was now being utilized in ways that served both her personal goals and the broader public interest. Her journey from concealment to recognition had been challenging, but the ultimate outcome validated the value of embracing rather than hiding her specialized military training. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.